Hello everyone, welcome to the history class. I am PRATIVA BARIK from RAVENSHAW Junior College. In this class, I am going to discuss about the significance of the French Revolution. In the previous class, I have already discussed about the causes which were responsible for the outbreak of French Revolution in 1789 in France, and there are so many causes which are responsible for the outbreak of this French Revolution. The social cause, the economic cause, then the political cause, and then we have already discussed about the impact of foreign or the foreign influence and the impact of foreign events. Then we have already discussed about the intellectual cause, how the philosophers were responsible for changing the mindset of the people, and they revolted against the existing system, political system, social system, and economic system. There are many reforms which are brought due to the French Revolution. So, in this class, I am going to discuss about the significance of French Revolution, which was occurred in 1789, and how far the intellectual cause was responsible for the outbreak of French Revolution. Why the revolution started in France in 1789, which introduced new thinkings like liberty, equality, fraternity. These new ideologies were introduced in the world due to this French Revolution. So let's start this chapter. So why the revolution occurred in France? France से काहे की विप्लव हैला? फरासी विप्लवर कारण कौन थिला? तो प्रथमे काहे की फ्रांस रे? During that period, there are so many areas in the world where the autocratic and despotic rule was carried on by the monarchs. But why the people, the revolted in France? France माने काहे की विप्लव कले? कौन कारण थिला जे लोक माने एक परिवर्तन चाहिए? The society, there was a change in the political setup, the economic setup, and also in the field of intellectual field. There were changes in the intellectual field. So let's discuss about this. The revolution occurred in France only because of the following reasons. There are so many reasons responsible for the outbreak of the revolution in France. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ପୂର୍ବରୁ ଆଲୋଚନା କରିଛେ ଯେ ଅର୍ଥନୈତିକ କାରଣ ଦାୟୀ ଥିଲା ଫରାସୀ ବିପ୍ଳବ ପାଇଁ, but that was the immediate cause. ବା ଯେତେବେଳେ ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସର ଅର୍ଥନୈତିକ ଅବସ୍ଥା ଦେବାଳିଆ ହୋଇଗଲା, ଲୋକମାନେ ବିଦ୍ରୋହର ସ୍ୱର ଉତ୍ତୋଳନ କରିଥିଲେ। ତାହେଲେ କ'ଣ ସବୁ କାରଣ ଥିଲା ଯେ ଲୋକମାନେ ବିଦ୍ରୋହର ସ୍ୱର ଉତ୍ତୋଳନ କଲେ? So let's discuss about this. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ଆଲୋଚନା କରିଥିଲେ ଯେ ଫରାସୀ ବିପ୍ଳବର ଆଶୁ କାରଣ ଥିଲା ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସର ଗୁରୁତର ଆର୍ଥିକ ଦୁରାବସ୍ଥା, 7 ବର୍ଷୀୟ ଯୁଦ୍ଧ, ଆମେରିକାର ମୁକ୍ତି ସଂଗ୍ରାମରେ ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସ ଯେଉଁ ଅପର୍ଯ୍ୟାପ୍ତ ଅର୍ଥ ବ୍ୟୟ କରିଥିଲା, ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସ ରାଜବଂଶର ଅପରିମିତ ବ୍ୟୟ ରାଜକୋଷକୁ ଶୂନ୍ୟ କରିଦେଇଥିଲା। ତ ସେ ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସର 40% ଜାତୀୟ ସମ୍ପତ୍ତିର ଅଧିକାରୀ ଧର୍ମଯାଜକ ସାମନ୍ତ ଗୋଷ୍ଠୀ କୌଣସି ବି କର ସେମାନେ ପ୍ରଦାନ କରୁନଥିଲେ, ଏବଂ ସାଧାରଣ ଲୋକ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ସବୁ ପ୍ରକାର କର ଦେବାକୁ ସକ୍ଷମ ନଥିଲେ ସେଇମାନେ ହିଁ କର ଦେଉଥିଲେ। ତ ରାଷ୍ଟ୍ରର ଋଣଭାର ଏତେ ବୃଦ୍ଧି ପାଇଥିଲା ଯେ ଋଣଦାତାମାନେ ଋଣ ଦେବାକୁ ପ୍ରସ୍ତୁତ ନଥିଲେ। ତେଣୁ କୁହାଯାଉଥିଲା ଯେ ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସ ହେଉଛି ଅର୍ଥନୈତିକ ତ୍ରୁଟିର ପ୍ରକୃଷ୍ଟ ସଂଗ୍ରହାଳୟ। ତ ଫରାସୀ ଅର୍ଥନୀତିର ଗୁରୁତର ପରିସ୍ଥିତିରେ 16 ଲୁଇ ସିଂହାସନ ଅଧିଷ୍ଠିତ ହୋଇ ସମସ୍ୟାର ସମାଧାନ ପାଇଁ ତୁର୍ଗୋ ନାମକ ଜଣେ ବିଶିଷ୍ଟ ଅର୍ଥନୈତିଜ୍ଞଙ୍କୁ ଅର୍ଥ ସଚିବ ଭାବରେ ସେ ନିଯୁକ୍ତ କରିଥିଲେ। ତ ତୁର୍ଗୋଙ୍କର ମିତବ୍ୟୟତା, ବିଜ୍ଞ ନୀତି, ତାଙ୍କ ଦକ୍ଷତା ହେତୁ ଅର୍ଥନୈତିକ ଅବସ୍ଥା କିଛି ସୁଧୁରିଥିଲା। ତ ଫ୍ରାନ୍ସର ନିଅଣ୍ଟିଆ ବଜେଟକୁ ସେ ବଳକା ବଜେଟରେ ପରିଣତ କରିଥିଲେ, କିନ୍ତୁ ସାମନ୍ତ ବର୍ଗ ଏବଂ ରାଣୀଙ୍କର ସେ ଚକ୍ଷୁଶୀଳ ହୋଇଥିଲେ। ଶେଷରେ ରାଣୀ ମେରୀ ଏନ୍ତୋଇନେଙ୍କ ପ୍ରରୋଚନାରେ ତାଙ୍କୁ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟରୁ ଅନ୍ତର କରାଯାଇଥିଲା। ତାଙ୍କ ପରେ ଆସିଥିଲେ ନେକର ମଧ୍ୟ ଜଣେ ବ୍ୟାଙ୍କର ରୂପେ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟ କରୁଥିବାରୁ ଅର୍ଥନୀତି ସମ୍ବନ୍ଧରେ ତାଙ୍କର ବି ବହୁତ ଭଲ ଧାରଣା ଥିଲା, ଏବଂ ଫରାସୀ ଜନସାଧାରଣଙ୍କୁ ସେ ଦେଶର ଆର୍ଥିକ ପରିସ୍ଥିତି ସମ୍ବନ୍ଧରେ ସଚେତନ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ରାଜ୍ୟର ସମୁଦାୟ ଆୟ ବ୍ୟୟ ବିବରଣୀ ସେ ପ୍ରକାଶ କରିଥିଲେ। ତାଙ୍କର ଏହି ପଦକ୍ଷେପ ସାମନ୍ତ ବର୍ଗ ଓ ରାଣୀଙ୍କ ଦ୍ୱାରା ଗ୍ରହଣୀୟ ହୋଇନଥିଲା ଏବଂ ସେ ମଧ୍ୟ ପଦଚ୍ୟୁତ ହୋଇଥିଲେ। देन केलोन मध्य आस्थिले तापरे तो राजा को संतुष्ट करबा पई से खर्च काट परिवर्तन ऋण करी खर्च करबा पई प्रस्ताव देथिले। तांको 3 वर्ष रहणी भितरे फ्रांस रो ऋण भार अति मात्रा रे वृद्धि पाइथिला। तेणु फ्रांस रो सब गोष्ठी उपरे कर धार्य करी परिस्थितिर मुकाबिला पई केलोन राजा को परामर्श देथिले, कारण साधारण लोके अधिक कर देबा अवस्था रे नथिले। तेणु तांकर परामर्श हेतु से मध्य पदवी विदाय नहीं। तापर आसते ब्रियेनी 1787 रे ब्रियेनी फ्रांस रो अर्थ सचिव होइथिले। शून्य राजकोष देवालिया आर्थिक परिस्थिति किछि बेसी किछि करिबार नथिला। सेही वर्ष राजा षोड़शोली सामंत मानकर सभा से डकैथिले एवं सुविधा भोगी जो गोष्ठी थिले तांको ऊपर कर आदायर प्रस्ताव देथिले, से माने ताहा ग्रहण करनथिले। तेने सेही समय रे दुर्भिक्ष और व्यापक शस्यहानि होई चलीथिले से फ्रांस रे। तेणु बाध्य होई राजा 3टी स्टेट रे प्रतिनिधि मानकर एक सभा डाकिबा घोषणा करथिले, जहा 175 वर्ष व्यवधान परे बसिथिला। दैट वाज द मीटिंग ऑफ द स्टेट जनरल्स 1614 रु 1789 मध्य एही व्यवधान भितरे 175 वर्ष व्यवधान परे एही स्टेट जो 3टी स्टेट रो प्रतिनिधि मानकर सभा अनुष्ठित होइथिला। तो आमे जानिले जे अर्थनैतिक कारण हेउछि इमीडिएट करबा आसु कारण। देन द इंटेलेक्चुअल एनलाइटनमेंट ताहा कोन प्रकृत रे कारण थिला। इंटेलेक्चुअल इन द 18th century the French parted with conventional thoughts and began adopting the enlightened outlook at intellectual level. The cause of enlightenment was translated into reality by prominent French intellectuals like Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, Quesnay, Torg and D'Alembert. These thinkers or these philosophers infused independent thinking in people. The characteristic aspect of their thoughts was the establishment of a liberal, progressive and ideal society. They supported the cause of laissez-faire, elimination of prevalent disparity in taxation, and approved of the rights of autonomy in administration. By means of their thought-provoking writings, they laid bare inequality, exploitation, cruelty, religious intolerance, corrupt absolute monarchy, financial restrictions, agonies of the proletariat, administrative and judicial demerits. Writers were churning the discontent of French society. Literary persons had become politicians in a country having no parliament. By means of satire and humor, criticism and comparison, scientific explanation, socialistic ideology, and candid contempt, they revealed the hollowness of the French institutions. So the intellectual movement of that time adopted scientific outlook on life. Most remarkable aspect of the intellectual enlightenment in the 18th century was that man became the focus of serious thinking. Public welfare became the cherished aim. So there was the question. It is a controversial question. How far the intellectual movement launched by the intellectuals was accountable for the French Revolution? प्रकृत कहबाकू गले दार्शनिक कारण कौन फरासी विप्लव पर दायी थिला? जो दार्शनिक मान थिले रूसो, वोल्टेयर, मॉन्टेस्क्यू, सेमानकर राइटिंग, सेमानकर लेखा, सेमानकर चिंताधारा लोक मानकू एते मात्रा रे प्रभावित करिथिला जे सेमाने कोन सतरे से दार्शनिक कारण जगो फ्रांस रे विप्लव रो सूत्रपात होइथिला. This is really a burning question whether it is true or not, whether the intellectual movement was responsible for the outbreak of the French Revolution. So let's discuss about this question. So here, generally intellectual consciousness is called the soul of revolution, and the credit of revolution goes to philosophical writers and the intelligentsia. It is obvious that the French writers and thinkers steered the feelings of the masses against the damage caused by political, social, economic and religious evils. Otherwise, various evils were rampant in the society from early times, but no revolution did break out. So the French Revolution originated from the combination of intellectual movement and material misery. Roughly speaking, philosophers gave birth to the revolution. On the contrary, some thinkers state that the intellectual writings did not evoke revolutionary change. The learned historian Hazen maintains that the French Revolution was triggered off by the evils of life and the errors of governing bodies rather than by the intellectuals. Revolutionary milieu of that age was utterly accountable for transforming the public into revolutionaries in 1789. Against their will and philosophical ideology did not play an important role in creating the revolutionary milieu. A few scholars hold that it was the impact of astounding success of the War of American Independence and British freedom rather than the influence of intellectuals which inculcated in people a strong desire for freedom in the latter half of the 18th century. ଆହୁରି ମଧ୍ୟ କିଛି ମତ ଐତିହାସିକ ମତ କରିଛନ୍ତି ଯେ ବୈଦେଶିକ ପ୍ରଭାବ ଯୋଗୁଁ due to the impact of foreign events the people they wanted to live their life independently. They were impressed by the American War of Independence. So ସେମାନେ ଚାହିଁଲେ ଆମେରିକା ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ସଂଗ୍ରାମ ପରି ଯେପରି ସେମାନେ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନତା ଲାଭ କରିଥିଲେ ସେପରି ସେମାନେ ସ୍ୱାଧୀନ ଭାବରେ ଜୀବନଯାପନ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ଇଂରେଜ ମାନଙ୍କର ସ୍ୱାଧୀନ ଜୀବନଯାପନ ଶୈଳୀ ସେମାନଙ୍କୁ ମଧ୍ୟ ପ୍ରଭାବିତ କରିଥିଲା. So some historians says that the intellectual cause or the philosophical writings of the intellectuals that created new thinking, new ideas and ideologies among the people of France and they revolted against the against the rulers. They are absolute and autocratic, despotic rulers of the Bourbon dynasty. So France ro लोकमाने फ्रांस रो साधारण जनता से माने इंटेलेक्चुअल विज्ञ व्यक्ति मानकर लेखा द्वारा प्रभावित होई तांकर एक छत्रवादी सरकार के विरुद्ध रे बा बर्बन राजवंश विरुद्ध रे स्वर उत्तोलन करथिले. So let's discuss about the causes how far the why the revolution occurred in France. So thinkers' contribution to revolution may be disputed, but they had forecast the revolution and were its disseminators. All demerits and evils rampant in the governing system of France, and they were revealed so effectively by writers that people were constrained to divert their attention to the factors of crisis. So thinkers and writers were representatives of those driving forces which freighted the external layers of French life. The fire of their thoughts consumed the ties of their intellectuals held with the established authority and order. So we have already discussed about the immediate cause of revolution. The improvident policy of the then King Louis XVI made revolution inevitable. He lacked the knack of tackling the complex situations of administration. Antoine's influence over Louis proved to be fatal. She became the butt of public reproach due to her conduct and undue interference in administration. The French public held her in contempt. Other immediate cause of the French Revolution was the miserable economic condition of the nation. Ernest Brougy has ascribed the causes of revolution to those financial policies and economic crisis that had pitched the proletariat into misery. So it cannot be denied that effective measures were not taken to improve the economic condition. Besides it, the vacuum of political force brought all efforts to a deadlock. So the sharp weapon of political will is needed to implement the blueprint of an effective scheme. The economic condition of France began to decline from the period of Louis XIV, and it went from bad to worse when Louis XVI ascended the throne. There was no control over the expenses incurred by the king and his courtiers. So France was gradually sinking into bankruptcy, but the ruler didn't care for it. Louis initiated many projects in order to improve the financial condition of the country, but he left them incomplete, which fomented the rage of the public. Louis changed finance ministers in succession. In August 1786, the royal treasury turned empty. Therefore, Calonne 1783 to 1787 AD, the finance minister coaxed the king into summoning the council of influential persons in order to seek a solution for the economic crisis. This special council consisted of priests, feudal lords, magistrates, and others, but had no representation of the common people. In the meeting, Calon moved a proposal that all sections of the society should be taxed to improve the economic condition of the country. But the illustrious members of the council demanded Calon's dismissal. Hence, Calon was dismissed, and the Queen's favorite Briny was made the finance minister in 1787. He was besought the king to impose a uniform land tax on all sections of the society, as well as a new stamp tax. The Council of Illustrious members rejected Brené's proposals. The king dissolved the council and sent Brené's proposals to the Parliament of Paris for registration. The Parliament refused to register the new taxes and declared that none other than the States General was empowered to impose new taxes. So the Parliament demanded the king to convene the session of the States General. It filled the king and his ministers with great fear. The king had to call the session of the States General under duress. The session of the States General was scheduled for 7th May 1789. So the States General was an old representative council. What was the States General? The States General was an old representative council of France whose session had not been held for the last 175 years. Anyway, Louis made up his mind to call the session of his States General. The election for which he was held in 1788. The States General had three categories of members. The feudal lords were in the first category, priests in the second, and the third category comprised the representatives of the proletariat. The first remarkable thing about that election was that the king doubled the number of third category. The other characteristics of the election was that the voters presented to their representatives chairs, which unfolded the demands of the voters, like establishment of constitutional rule, sanction of public liberty, equality of all before law, and uniform taxation. Thus, the French Revolution erupted from two significant causes. First cause was the economic and political bankruptcy of the French government, and second, the current of new thoughts, diffusion of literary trends, the phenomena of social dissatisfaction and political complaints. So, why the revolution occurred in France? There were many reasons responsible for this. First was the nation state was formed very early in France, and the whole nation had been politically united. Political unity contributed to generating a nationwide public opinion, a nationwide movement, and a nationwide policy. Although the French Revolution hit at the feudal setup, its trend was not as distorted as the revolution, which had affected Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Italy. With the end of political setup of feudalism in France, anarchy ceased there towards the end of the 16th century. During the reign of Louis XIII, 1610 to 1643, Richelieu strengthened the central rule. Then the Louis XIV divested the nobility of their important rights and divided the state into provinces in order to centralize, systematize the government and appointed intendants. So here the revolution occurred in France only because of the formation of nation state. Nation state was formed very early in France, and the whole nation had been politically united. This is the first cause which is responsible for the occurrence of revolution in France. Then the second cause was the French farmers were relatively vigilant. The French farmers were little vigilant. They were dissatisfied with their wretched condition and wanted to improve it. They questioned why they should pay taxes to nobles when the functions of nobility were performed by the government servants. So this is the second cause which was responsible for the French Revolution. Then the third cause was from the period of Louis XIII, the feudal barons had been divested of their several rights and were relegated to the position of hangers of the king. So many nobles sank into poverty as a result of indulging in heavy drinking, gambling, and profligation. So, during the idle and weak rule of Louis XVI, the feudal lords made efforts to revive their lost political prestige, but in vain. Hence, they became supporters of political upheavals and supported the demand for convening a session of the States General. जेहेतु नोबल माने सेमान मध्यम चाहिए कि तांकर पूर्व प्रतिष्ठा बा सामंत माने चाहिए कि तांकर पूर्व प्रतिष्ठा फेरी पाइबे सेथि पई से माने स्टेट जनरल जो सेशन को से माने समर्थन करथिले. Then the fourth cause. Prior to the revolution, there had been no other intellectual and liberal rulers. Prior to the revolution, there had been no other intellectual and liberal rulers than the Prussian ruler Frederick the Great, who ruled from 1740 to 1760, the Austrian Emperor Joseph II, who ruled from 1765 to 1790, the Russian Empress Catherine the Great, who ruled from 1762 to 1796, and the Spanish ruler Charles III from 1759 to 1788. If France had adopted intellectual absolutism in place of hereditary despotism, the revolution could have been averted for some time. But both Louis XV and Louis XVI proved to be incompetent rulers. They were not able rulers to tackle this situation. Then the fifth cause, the intellectual philosophers of France exposed inequality, corruption, and religious superstitions rampant in the French society and laid bare before the public the profligate living of the nobility. They created an intellectual atmosphere and prepared a psychological ground for the revolution. So, दार्शनिक मानकर मध्य लेखा बा सेमानकर चिंताधारा लोक मानक प्रभावित करथिला एवं लोक माने किपरि भाबरे समाज रे प्रतिष्ठा होई परिबो लिबर्टी इक्वालिटी फ्रैटर्निटी सेथि पय सेमाने प्रयास करथिले. Then the sixth cause. Needless to say, a conscious group is required to understand the concept of revolution, and France had such an enlightened group. एक विज्ञ गोष्ठी आवश्यक जेतले गोटे विप्लव आरंभ करा जिवो तो फ्रांस से समस्त थिले. Even after enjoying a good economic status, the middle class was not rewarded with influential ranks in the French government, and it perturbed them. The conviction held by the middle class that we are better than the nobles became a prominent cause of the revolution. मध्यवित्त श्रेणी जो माने कि विज्ञ थिले से माने समाज रे संभ्रांत मानक ठारू बहु गुण रे अधिक विज्ञ थिले तो से माने ताकर कहिबार थिले जे वी आर बेटर देन द नोबल्स. तो ताहा फरासी विप्लव रो अनेक कारण थिला. द इंसिडेंट ऑफ बैंक्रप्सी ऑफ फ्रांस annoyed the middle class because many of its members had lent enough money to the government. Therefore, they wanted a change in the contemporary political and social organization. It was the middle class which led the peasants to revolt successfully. It played a decisive role in the French Revolution. Then, in the next slide, we'll discuss about the seventh cause. The French capital Paris had become the hub of political and administrative activities. Because of the excessive centralization of administration, a slight commotion in Paris influenced the entire country. That is why the entire nation greeted the revolutionary forces when they took possession of Paris. Then the eighth cause. In France, the entire money of villages flowed from there and got pooled in a few cities. In this way, the incompatible conditions like abject poverty and misery of the lower class and immense wealth and luxurious living of the feudal lords paved the way for the revolution. France रे विप्लव रो अनेक कारण थिला. जो माने गरीब थिले से माने अधिक कर प्रदान करुथिले तो ग्रामरो सब धन रत्न शहर किछि शहर को बहि जाउथिला एवं लोक माने कृषक माने साधारण लोक जो माने दरिद्र रे कालातिपात करुथिले किंतु धनी व्यक्ति माने शहर रे सुख स्वच्छंद जीवन यापन करुथिले विलासमय जीवन यापन करुथिले जहा फ्रांस विप्लवर बा फरासी विप्लवर एक कारण थिला. सो नेक्स्ट दैट वाज द नेक्स्ट कॉज. When the ninth cause, the War of American Independence, injected new political awareness in France. When the French soldiers came back to France after gaining victory in the War of American Independence, they were swayed by a desire to better their bitter condition. Besides it, the War of American Independence influenced France in so many ways. Lafayette and his fellow soldiers learned from the American Revolution that to oppose the wrong is a holy duty. सबुबले भूल को विरोध करिबा हेउछि पवित्र कर्तव्य. So the French people also learned from Americans that the chief aim of the government must be liberty rather than happiness or prosperity or the security of government. So in this way, the War of American Independence injected new political awareness in France. They wanted liberty. They wanted to oppose the wrong. So there was the revolution. Then the 10th cause. The French army was also discontent with the government. Soldiers had not been paid their salaries for many months. They got neither good uniform nor good food. The discontent among the French soldiers had reached such a disgusting level that they cooperated and supported the revolutionaries. फ्रांस रो जो सैनिक माने थिले सेमाने मध्य विरोध करथिले सेमाने विप्लव को समर्थन करथिले बिकॉज़ दे वर नॉट गिवन देयर रेम्युनरेशन फॉर मेनी मंथ्स. सेमाने को बहु मास धरि तांको तांकर दरमा प्रदान करा जाय नथिला. तो जहा पर सेमाने असंतुष्ट थिले. सेमाने को भलो खाद्य दिया जाउ नथिला. सेमाने को सेमाने कोनोसी भी विलासमय जीवन यापन सेमाने बरंग दारिद्र्य कारातिपात करथिले. सो दैट दे आल्सो रेज देयर वॉइस against the existing political system, against the government, and they supported and cooperated with the revolutionaries. सेमाने विप्लवी मान को समर्थन करथिले, विप्लवी मान को सहयोग करथिले. फ्रांस जेतो विप्लव देखाइतला 1799 रे. So the soldiers, they also cooperated the revolutionaries and they provided every type of help to the revolutionaries. So these are the causes which were responsible, or due to these reasons, there was the revolution occurred in France. In the next point, we'll discuss about the revolution. ताले विप्लव रा घोषणा करा गला. विप्लव किपरि भाव जेतेबेले फरासी विप्लव घोषणा करा गला 1789 मसीहा मे 5 तारिख रे भर्साई नगर रे स्टेट प्रतिनिधि जो सभा अनुष्ठित थला. सभा रे प्रथम द्वितीय स्टेट रे मिलित प्रतिनिधि एवं तृतीय स्टेट रा प्रतिनिधि मध्य रे द्वंद्व और कलह उपजी थिला. तेणु 1789 मसीहा जून 17 तारिख रे तृतीय स्टेट रा प्रतिनिधि माने जातीय सभा गठन करी विप्लव घोषणा कले. 1789 जुलाई 14 तारिख रे से पेरिस नगरी रे अवस्थित बस्तिल दुर्ग को ध्वस्त विध्वस्त करथिले, जहा थिला अत्याचारी शासनर प्राण केन्द्र. दुर्गर पतन परे परे फरासी विप्लव प्रबल बेगरे देशर कोण अनुकोण को प्रसारित हो गला. फ्रांस रे राजतंत्र अवसान घटिला. सेथि पई जुलाई 14 तारिख रो फ्रांस रो स्वाधीनता दिवस रो मान्यता दिया जाए. जुलाई 14 तारिख को कहा जाए फ्रांस रो स्वाधीनता दिवस. So in order to solve the financial problem, the States General was summoned on 5th May 1989. The third states demanded to join the States General with the clergies and the nobles, but when their demands were not accepted, the third states formed the National Assembly on 17 June 1789. When the people saw the armed forces around the fort of Bastille, they thought that the king was prepared to destroy the French people. A large number of people marched towards Paris with anger and assembled there. On 14 July 1789, the people attacked the fort of Bastille and destroyed it. They also freed the prisoners. Louis XVI was escaped with his queen Marie Antoine, but he was caught with his son and Queen Marie Antoine. The king was killed by guillotine in 1793 with his queen. At this time, Austria, Prussia, Holland, Spain and England declared war against France. At this critical juncture, Napoleon Bonaparte appeared on the political horizon of France. During his reign, France reached the zenith of prosperity. So this is all about the French Revolution. Then we'll discuss about the significance of French Revolution. The next slide, we'll discuss about the significance of the French Revolution. So French Revolution, before we'll discuss about the significance of the French Revolution, let me tell you some reviews of the revolution. Phases, there were the phases of revolution. The beginning of the revolution was heralded by two factors of convening a session of the States General 1789 and the declaration of the National Assembly. The remarkable achievements during the next 2 years were declaration of human rights, drafting a new constitution, an overall change in administrative and judicial structure, and seizure of the church property by the state. The mob of Parisians led the revolution and the Jacobin party emerged in France. The National Assembly was replaced by the Legislative Assembly October 1st, 1791 to September 21st, 1792. 1 year after the formation of the Legislative Assembly, the revolution entered its second phase in August to September 1792. During the second phase, monarchy was overthrown and a republic was established in France. Legislative Assembly was replaced by the newly elected National Council or Convention 1792 to 1795, which pushed revolution into the third phase. During the third phase, France underwent the reign of terror. The reigns of government were held by militants and committed revolutionaries. So they defended the cause of revolution from its enemies and worked for the good of common people. But people were afraid of the extremities of terrorism. Hence the revolution entered the next phase. The Directory came into existence during the fourth and the last phase of revolution. In that system, 5 directors were endowed with the executive powers and the legislative powers were attributed to a bicameral parliament. Napoleon the Great subverted that governing system in 1799. Now then we'll discuss about the nature of French Revolution. The French Revolution was a public revolution started by the aristocrats and put to an end by a military dictator. The aristocrats wanted to establish their sovereignty by eliminating the tyranny of Louis XVI. The session of the States General typified the success of aristocrats' revolution. The nobility sided with the king and tried to oppress the middle class. This pushed the revolution to the second phase. In a second phase, the revolution was headed by the middle class. The common masses backed up the middle class wholeheartedly in order to work up a complete revolution in the real sense, but they were constrained to remain simply spectators. Incompetent leadership of the middle class thrust the revolution in its third phase. Then violent middle class became dominant in the third phase. The reign of terror and violence started then, but the French public and a majority of liberal middle class were not prepared to bear with terror. Therefore, the reins of revolution came again into the hands of liberal middle class because of Thermidorian reaction in July 1794. Then formation of the Directory and the rise of Napoleon deviated France from the Republic too far in 1792. Napoleon, who spread the revolution all over Europe, proved to be both a friend and enemy of the revolution. Under Napoleon's rule, the absolute autocracy eliminated by the revolution revived in France, but France and Europe had relished the flavor of the fruits of the revolution: equality, liberty, and fraternity. It may be concluded that the nature of the French Revolution remained like a river which started from the peak of a high mountain, crossed several hillocks, and flowed sometimes rapidly and sometimes gently. So here is the nature and phases of the revolution. Then we'll discuss the correlation between the objectives and achievements of the revolution. It is worth remembering that neither the French people wanted revolution nor there was a solid background for it in 1789. Unexpectedly, the Convention of States General, which was called so seek a solution for the economic crisis, fomented the cause of revolution, and the French Revolution exploded spontaneously. Objectives and attainments of the revolution underwent continuous changes in proportion to changing circumstances and leadership. Therefore, to seek a direct correlation between the aims and the achievements of the French Revolution is neither feasible nor rational. So in the first phase, majority of people wanted to eliminate the feudal system. The bourgeois or the middle class wanted to remove all the economic reservations, particularly the feudal restrictions. Further, it craved for social prestige and participation in administration. Farmers wished to get rid of feudal taxes and liabilities. Besides, the public was eager to have special equality, equal opportunity, and uniformity of law. Most of the ambitions of the middle class were fulfilled, but the principle of equality was broken. Farmers were deprived of political and economic equality. So, in the second phase of revolution, the monarchy declined and the king was assassinated. Although the revolution did not aim at eliminating the monarchy, people were discontent with the tyranny of the king and his autocratic rule. In the third phase, the revolution assumed an international dimension. The criticism of the revolution, as well as threats given by European countries and the Girondist ideology of international revolution, all sparked off a war between France and other European countries. At the same time, a terrorist government was established by the Jacobin leaders. The National Convention was constrained to take drastic measures in order to end civil war, maintain national security, establish the rule of law, and to salvage the nation from economic crisis. In its last phase, the revolution was again dominated by the bourgeois. It made the common people helpless, weak, and corrupt rule of the directory gave a chance to Napoleon to hold the reins of government. It benefited the bourgeois. So there are many celebrities who inspired the revolution, like Mirabeau, then Danton, Lafayette, Marat, then Robespierre, and Carnot, then Sayce and Saint Just. So next we will discuss about the significance of French Revolution. French Revolution rejuvenated the political, social, religious, and economic systems of France. Its doctrines, liberty, equality, and fraternity reigned the entire Europe. So French Revolution influenced not only the French public but left an indelible impression on the Europe and the entire world. German philosopher Kant termed it the victory of wisdom. Thinkers like Hegel planted trees to commemorate the revolution. After the fall of Bastille, students danced with great delight on the roads of St. Petersburg, thinking about the revolution. The English poet Wordsworth became enthralled and regretted for not being young and French. The prominent Whig leader Fox supported the cause of revolution. As a matter of fact, the history of modern France is the flowering of the Great Revolution of 1789. That revolution rejuvenated the political, social, religious, and economic systems of France. Its doctrines, liberty, equality, and fraternity reigned the entire Europe. The French Revolution converted French history into the history of Europe and the national hero of France. Napoleon got a golden chance of becoming the hero of Europe. So it is not easy to evaluate the influence of French Revolution on the world. French Revolution played an important role in the success of Greek independence in 1830. Napoleon played a significant role in the unification of Italy. He paved the way for the unification of Germany by eradicating the Holy Roman Empire. The vast effect of French Revolution did not spare England too. So in the next slide, we'll discuss about it. ताहले आमे कोन आलोचना करजे फरासी विप्लव तात्पर्य कोन थिला फरासी विप्लव थिला आधुनिक विश्व इतिहास अन्यतम श्रेष्ठ घटना जहार तात्पर्य सुदूर प्रसारी थिला फरासी विप्लव मध्ययुगीय राजा शासन पद्धति कुठारघात कर राजतंत्र समाप्ति आनी राजनीति क्षेत्र में नूतन जुगर सूचना ने साम्य मुक्ति और भ्रातृत्वर बाना उड़ाई जहाँ विप्लवर मूल मंत्र थिला विप्लवी मान द्वारा घोषित नागरिक अधिकार मानविक अधिकार प्रतिष्ठा क्षेत्र एक गुरुत्वपूर्ण दलिल तो ऐतिहासिक एक्टन भाषा में दलिल ओजन पृथ्वीर सबू लाइब्रेरी बही ओजन ठारू अधिक और नेपोलियन सैन्य बाहिनी ठारू अधिक शक्तिशाली सो राजनीति क्षेत्र में राजतंत्र पतन घटाई यह गणतांत्रिक शासन व्यवस्था प्रतिष्ठा करथिला लोकंकर सार्वभौम अधिकार फरासी विप्लव एक महान अवदान यह सहित लोक मान आईनगत समानता आईन आखिरे समस्त समान और व्यक्तिगत स्वाधीनता प्रदान कला जहाँ लोक वंचित थे फरासी विप्लव हेतु लोक मैंने एक नूतन एक फरासी विप्लव हेतु एक नूतन शक्ति उद्रेक होता जहाँ जनतार शक्ति हिसाब से कथित। यही जनता हेले सार्वभौम क्षमतार अधिकारी जहाँ गणतांत्रिक मनोभाव को सुदृढ़ करिबारे सहायक होइथिला। धर्म क्षेत्र में असहिष्णुता धर्मगत वैषम्यर अवसान घटी धर्म उपासनागत स्वाधीनता लोक मिलता। चर्चर प्रभुत्व को अवनमित करा जाई राष्ट्र अधीन रखा जाइथिला। चर्च संपत्ति को जातीय संपत्ति रे शामिल करा जाइथिला करागला। फरासी विप्लव आदर्श उपनिवेशवाद दासत्व प्रथार मध्य अवक्षय घटिला। प्रथमे फरासी माने ही सेमानकर एक उपनिवेश दासत्वर अवसान घटाइबा द्वारा अन्य यूरोपीय देश माने ही नीति ग्रहण करथिले। एथिसहित उपनिवेशवासी मुक्ति संग्राम पाई मध्य परोक्ष प्रेरणा लाभ करथिले। फरासी विप्लव उन्मोचन करथिला जातीयतावादर मार्ग। एही विप्लव रे साधारण नर नारी स्वतःस्फूर्त भाव में सामिल होइथिबारु देश पाई जाति पाई तांका मनरे जातीयताबोधर चेतनार सृष्टि होइथिला। एही चेतना परवर्ती समय ग्रीस बेल्जियम इटाली जर्मनी को प्रभावित करथिला। भोट अधिकार धर्मगत अधिकार सहित फरासी विप्लव आनिथिला संवादपत्र स्वाधीनता प्रत्येक व्यक्तिर स्वाधीन मत व्यक्त करिवार अधिकार। एहा परठारु लेखक साहित्यिक दार्शनिक माने स्वाधीन भाव में निजर मत व्यक्त करी गणतंत्र और मानव अधिकार स्थापनार भित्तिभूमि को सुदृढ़ करथिले। फरासी विप्लव परठारु फरासी जाति साम्य मुक्ति मैत्री सार्वजनीन भ्रातृत्वर प्रवक्ता भाव में परिचित हैला। तो यही आदर्श विश्वर अन्य देश को प्रभावित करथिला। आदर्श विश्वर अन्य देश को प्रसारित होई मनुष्यर चिंता जगत में मध्ययुगीय संकीर्ण भावधारार समाप्ति आनिथिला। फ्रांस रे सामंतवाद कृषि वृत्ति प्रथा लोप पाइथिला। सामंत धर्मजाजक संपत्ति बाज्याप्त होई समाज रे साम्यवाद प्रवर्तन होइथिला। प्रथम और द्वितीय स्टेट भोग करथुवा सुविधा सुजोगर विलोप घटाई देशर नेतृत्व नैथिले मध्यमित गोष्ठी। फरासी विप्लव हेतु जनता शक्तिर उद्रेक होइथिला। आमे ए जो आलोचना कल सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ द फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन ताहा ए प्रभाव थिला। तो इट इज नॉट इजी टू इवैल्यूएट द इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन। देन द फर्स्ट रिपब्लिक ऑफ फ्रांस lasted a few years only and may indicate that the revolution was a fiasco. Although France retrieved monarchy, it sustained good objectives of the revolution. Feudal prerogatives could not flourish again and the church could not revive its bygone glory. So government was run efficaciously and the condition of farmers improved considerably. Jurisdiction of law increased. Taxation was made more rational. In this way, French Revolution planted the sapling of modern age in the graveyard of medieval system. The French Revolution originated a new concept in the matter of state, propagated new ideology in respect of politics and society, and presented a fresh, novel outlook towards life. It kindled imagination and thoughts in the majority of people, cultivated matchless enthusiasm in them, and infused immense hopes in them. Undoubtedly, the objectives of French Revolution aborted, but as Jawaharlal Nehru has written, the idea of the republic pervaded the entire Europe, and in addition to it, the principles that had been incorporated in the Declaration of Human Rights were diffused. On the whole, historians don't have a uniform view on the importance of French Revolution. Webster and Randall maintain that the revolution proved to be an anti-democratic, unprogressive and anarchic movement. But Kropotkin holds that the revolution was a fountain of all modern thoughts. The French historians hold that the revolution laid the foundation of liberal, democratic and progressive outlook of modern life. Some historians believe that the French Revolution has played a remarkable role in the making of modern age in Europe and familiarized the common people with the spirit of liberty, equality and democracy. It destroyed the vestige of old system in the fields of politics, economy, social life, diplomacy and war. Undoubtedly, the French Revolution occupies a remarkable place in history, particularly in European history. Napoleon's achievements as well as French Revolution opened the eyes of the world. In spite of all this, the French Revolution and Napoleon's adventures don't deserve much importance. America had attained independence before the French Revolution began, and it was of utmost importance for the future of Europe and the world. Even before 1789, the current of intense reformism and democratic public opinion had swept across both England and America very forcefully and steadily, and those factors contributed to great liberal changes. Industrial revolution had started then. Science and culture, the root causes of significant changes that occurred in 19th century, had made considerable progress Even before 1789, in the field of literature and art, the Romantic movement had burst forth even before the beginning of the revolution, and it played a decisive role in shaping the future of revolution. Contemporary events impinged upon the attainment of Romantic period, but the inherent intellect of that age would have certainly sprouted and blossomed in the absence of the repercussions of the revolution. There were not only those who performed feats of valor in the revolution and molded the future of Europe in a novel way, but there were also a few geniuses like Antoine Lavoisier, Adam Smith, James Watt, and Jeremy Bentham, English philosopher. When the rattlings of war and the emission of smoke from the guns vanish, the operation of eternal forces of human destiny may be perceived, shaping the future of the nation and its people. So, in the next slide, we'll discuss about the impact of the French Revolution. The French Revolution, its significance not only in the context of France, but it left its impress on Europe and the whole world. The ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, and democracy, brought about a political awakening in Europe. The people now began to rise and revolt, demand their rights. We can study the impact of the French Revolution under the following heads. Impact on France. First point is impact on France. The French Revolution was a powerful reaction against various deformities, anomalies, and fundamental faults inherent in the old system of France. It influenced various aspects of French life. It was an uprising against the French society based on inequality, the luxurious life of the clergy, and economic bankruptcy of the state. It put an end to the maladministration of the Bourbon dynasty and paved the way for democracy. So, end of autocratic and despotic Bourbon dynasty is the first point. The revolution shook the foundation of autocratic and despotic rule of the French king for the sake of administration. France was divided into 34 intendancies, which were put under the charge of intendants who were corrupt and cruel. The public hated them, the revolution uprooted them, and after the new constitution of 1791, no king claimed divine rights. Then the impact on social system, end of the privileged class. The first one, the French society was based on inequality, disparity, privileges and concessions. One class ruled in luxuries while a vast majority ruled in penury. So the revolution hacked the roots of this disparity and initiated a new social organization. Then there was the end of feudalism. Feudal lords were very powerful in France and occupied all key posts in administration, military and church. They were exempt from paying taxes. They harassed the peasants, realized several taxes from them, and forced them to free labor. The revolutionaries tortured these feudal lords and killed many of them. Some of them fled from France, and the common people heaved a sigh of relief when the yoke of feudal exploitation was overthrown. Then the improvement in the condition of middle and lower classes. The middle class comprised businessmen, moneylenders, teachers, doctors, and lawyers, etc. They were intelligent people, but the gates of higher posts were closed for them. They were often humiliated. After the revolution, they felt great relief. They threw off unnecessary restrictions heaped on them by the feudal lords. The condition of landless peasants and serfs improved after the revolution. Land was allotted to them and several taxes were revoked. Forced labor was banned. Then the decline in the supremacy of church. The next slide. There is a decline in the supremacy of church. The revolution relieved France of the sovereignty, despotism, and corruption of the church. Church land and property was confiscated, and the clergy were warned to do their duty. They had to take an oath of loyalty to the constitution. Religious freedom was granted to all sects. Then the revolutionaries laid more emphasis on the worship of intellect and reason. Then there was the impact on economy. There was the revolutionary France suffered from economic decay and disintegration. The government was burdened with loans. The system of collecting taxes was expensive, corrupt, and unsatisfactory. Then revolution brought about a radical change in the economic condition of France. Land was seized from feudal barons and sold to farmers at a cheap rate. Octroi was abolished. Then administrative, constitutional, and legal reforms were introduced in France. The old administrative system of France was defective and in a state of decline. So it was organized after the revolution. The whole of France was divided into 83 departments. These departments were divided into 374 cantons or districts, which are further divided into 44,000 communes, which enjoyed complete autonomy. The Constitution of 1791 made France a constitutional monarchy with a unicameral legislature, but the Constitution of 1795 established the First Republic. The corrupt judiciary was eliminated and a uniform legal system was introduced. Napoleon codified laws. Then Declaration of Human Rights. The revolutionaries issued a Declaration of Human Rights to make people conscious of their rights and duties. The declaration had 17 sections. It said that all men are free and equal, the people are sovereign, and law is the expression of their will. Administrators can use only the authority legally invested in them. Then the declaration granted personal freedom as well as freedom of expression and speech. In the latter years of this declaration became a charter of liberalism. Whenever people talk about human rights, they are reminded of this declaration. Then evil effects of the revolution. Let's discuss about evil effects. Because of certain evil effects of the revolution, historians have criticized it as a reactionary, anti-democratic, and retrogressive. The evil effects enumerated are: during the revolution, people had to suffer a lot of troubles. Many innocent people were guillotined during the reign of terror. Second was the disturbance, anarchy, and disorder continued in France for a long time. And third was foreign reactionary nations waged war against France to end the revolution. These wars lasted 23 years and adversely affected French economy. In spite of all this, the revolution gave the French a new lifestyle and food for thought. People unanimously accepted the significance of the principle of change. Then the impact on Britain. Britain open-heartedly welcomed the revolution, for she thought it would usher in democracy in France. But when it became violent and the king and the queen were assassinated, she turned against it. Burke believed that the outcome of the revolution would be anarchy and disorder. And he was right. To avoid the influence of revolution, Pitt followed a reactionary policy and banned freedom of press, political meetings and speeches. But inspired by the revolution, people in England demanded parliamentary reforms. It aroused the spirit of nationalism among the Irish people, and they started their freedom struggle against Britain. Then impact on the rest of Europe. It was a pan-European revolution that started in France and spread all over Europe during the reign of Napoleon. It had the roots of ancient system of Europe. People rose in revolts and demanded political rights. Frustration caused by the ideas of revolution initiated a reactionary age in Europe. The decisions taken at the Congress of Vienna aimed at crushing these ideas and subduing France. The Austrian Chancellor Metternich took several steps to repress liberalism. Diplomacy through conferences was one of them, but the scholars and the writers spread the ideals of liberty, fraternity, and nationality among the masses through their works. Then the worldwide permanent impact. The French Revolution left its impact on the whole world. It generated a new power which gave birth to a new civilization. The Declaration of Human Rights emphasized that sovereignty lies with the people and law is an expression of their will. It kicked a number of movements where people demanded not only a political freedom but also right to property and freedom of expression. They also demanded franchise. The revolution aroused the spirit of political, social and economic equality. Women claimed equal rights with men. The revolution awakened the spirit of nationalism, which paved the way for the unification of Italy and Germany. This spirit soon infused the people in Belgium, Serbia, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria and Hungary. It also popularized the concept of democracy. Absolute monarchy was replaced by constitutional monarchy in many countries. It fortified the concept of fraternity and separated religion from politics. It stood for secularism and condemned religious fanaticism. So, dear students, we have discussed about the French Revolution. This is one of the most important chapters which we have discussed in these two classes. The causes which are responsible for the French Revolution, then the significance of French Revolution, the concept of liberty, equality, fraternity, nationalism that came into existence due to the French Revolution. The middle class people, the bourgeois section of the society, they established their rule. So here we have discussed about the significance of French Revolution. তাহলে ফরাসি বিপ্লবর বিপ্লব আলোচনা কলে किपरि भाबरे एही संग्राम लोक माने बहुत लाभवान होइतिले दे गॉट liberty, equality, fraternity, the human rights was also given to the people, and the people became responsible, and they became conscious about their duties towards state. So in the next class we'll discuss a new chapter. So thank you all for watching this learning video.